eminent British journalist and BBC reporter to our school. This is a British Council initiative as part of their UK Science and Research Showcasing in India. Lecture tour of eminent UK scientists and science communicators across multiple cities in India is an annual program of the Council under the head Great Talks. Her lecture today is on the topic Going Back to the Moon, a Journalist's Perspective. We also welcome Dr. Mousumi Mondal, Head Higher Education East and Northeast India, British Council.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very pleased to be here. And what can I say? A journalist's perspective. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, it means I'm not a scientist, even though I am a science journalist. I do have a science background. My background is physics. So I do tend to err towards the stories that are physics related and space science related because I'm a bit of a space geek. European Space Agency, ESA, I do a lot of work there, and that's great from a journalist's point of view because every mission is different. They're usually going to a different planet, or they might be going around Earth and doing Earth observation. This is the mission control room in Darmstadt, in Germany. And one of the missions that I've spent a lot of time on is Rosetta. And this was the mission that completed relatively recently and went to a comet 67P. It was the first space mission to actually orbit and then put a lander on a comet. And it was quite a good story because it was full of surprises, not least because most comets look like a giant potato flying through the sky, an icy, rocky potato. But when the spacecraft actually got there, it wasn't shaped like that at all. It was actually shaped like a kid's rubber duck that you'd put in the bath. And the scientists then had to reevaluate everything, particularly the orbital maneuvers, in terms of how you orbit something that is shaped differently to what you'd expect. European Space Agency astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti, she was our presenter, and it was about living on the International Space Station. And Samantha holds the record for the longest period of time in a continuous mission that a woman has ever spent in space. And she was in space for literally a few hours, under 200 days. Anjana Ahuja is the science columnist for the Financial Times, and I produced her first ever radio program for the BBC, which was on the science of lie detectors and whether we should or shouldn't accept them as in legal cases. Angela Saini has written, you might have heard of her because she wrote a great book about the rise of India in technology and science called Geek Nation. And her most recent book, Inferior, is about how science has treated women so badly in terms of their scientific results and research. Sarah is a fantastic space broadcaster, journalist, and Rebecca works for the BBC. So let's get to the moon then, let's start. I think it's really easy, particularly in the West, to think that the moon was all about America. And while they did great things, you've got to remember that it was the Russians who got into space first with Sputnik, the first satellite. It was the Russians who put the first man in space with Yuri Gagarin. It was the Russians who put the first woman in space with Valentina Tereshkova. And it was the Russians who made the first soft landing on the moon. Before Apollo, the Russians had got there. And this is it. This is what it looks like. And those little petals you can see, there's actually one on the other side too. When it landed on the moon, they unfurled like that to stabilize it. And it landed in a crater. Now the moon's covered with really soft, fine sand. So it was at a slight angle, sunk a little bit further, and it sent back the first pictures of the moon as well. Now we know there's water on the moon. Loads of missions had found it and looked at it, and in fact it was the India mission Chandrayaan-1 that proved the first direct confirmation that there was definitely water on the moon. So what they're thinking of doing, this is a fuel cell. Both NASA and ESA, and I'm sure other space agencies, are working on trying to produce improved versions of fuel cells where you can use the water, you can separate it into hydrogen and oxygen. During that process, you get electricity generated, and one of the byproducts of that process is water. So you can see how you've got a really nice little sustainable energy source here. They just need to improve the efficiency of the process. So already going to the moon, you've got the potential of how to build your accommodation. You've got water that you need to extract, and you've got potential power source. So actually, all you need to take up with you is your food and a toothbrush, and we're halfway there. Really, I mean, I was very excited knowing I was coming to India, because I do see India and China as these two nations that are on the up. Not just economically, but particularly within the world of space, that you're punching above your weight. So I think it really is the future that this nation will have people on the moon as well. And you've got the encouragement through Team Indus, and I've interviewed some of the people from Team Indus, not in person, but over a broadcast line, because the Google Lunar X Prize has really helped a lot of small companies and small ventures to think not just let's be government funded, but let's do this commercially. And the prize offered $20 million to anybody who could send a robot to the moon, move 500 meters, and send back video and images. Now, as it happened, the prize recently announced that nobody made the deadline. They kept extending the deadline. But Team Indus was one of the 5 shortlisted companies, as was teams, as was one in Israel. There have been international ones. There's been a team in America as well. But what it's done, nothing is ever wasted when you get that. Because I know that Team Indus, for instance, they used a lot of very experienced older scientists who had worked with ISRO, with a lot of younger scientists who are new to this, who weren't even born when people landed on the moon. And so that combination of youth and new ideas and energy with experience and knowledge has proved Team Indus really, really well there. What America are interested, they've recently, America's have changed their focus slightly, and this is what happens when you've got government space agencies, because they're dependent on the politics of the government in charge. Obama had cancelled a constellation program that was about the moon to focus on Mars. Surprise, surprise, Trump has decided to do the opposite of what Obama had done. And he has now said, no, after NASA spending 10 years or so focusing on Mars, no, let's go to the moon. Let's go back to the moon. So they want to do this deep space gateway. So instead of having a space station around the Earth, which Trump has just announced he's going to stop funding for the International Space Station. So you need that communication. You need a journalist there on the moon. And you need me. Thank you.